You're listening to The Breakup Theory, conversations about ending things and collective liberation. In this episode, Caroline and I talk to the wonderful Dr. Jaime M. Grant, a sex and intimacy coach, researcher, writer, and longtime activist. She recently published Kink for Dummies after her previous contribution to the series Polyamory for Dummies, and yes, it's that series. Jaime has also written a book and has been leading a workshop for many years around the world on mapping your desire, which helps people get in touch with what they actually like and want and perhaps have not been able to access. Jaime's been involved in queer and racial justice movements for decades, as well as doing survivor support, research on trans discrimination, and much more. As you'll hear, she's a passionate advocate and coach whose work really revolves around inspiring forms of connection through intimacy, relationship, and self-empowerment. Talking with Jaime about kink, poly, and sex was extremely helpful to me for putting into perspective the possible role of queer sex and intimacy within the struggle for liberation, autonomy, and the empire. I'm always interested in the ways that our relationship reproduce the world around us, but I've sometimes wondered if sex as revolutionary is just a dream. Perhaps it's just that I've taught too much Foucault. Our world is structured such that a process of self-discovery involves interrogating your sexuality and gender, so often getting caught up in the traps of identity that end up separating us or become modes of punishment. And even though we're told we have unique identities, we're still doing this work under social duress and shame, regardless of more expansive and visible queer communities, more attention to different ways of engaging in sex and relationship, and years of work that people like Jaime have done to support people in these discoveries. Polyamory plays a specific role within anarchist, anti-authoritarian, queer perspectives, as giving us ways to relate non-hierarchically. But as with queer love in general, it can get caught up in should and should nots, or the miasma of endless processes. Jaime brought a refreshing perspective that really should be the first way we access these things. Her approach to creating space to discuss issues around sex and intimacy and to be frank about desire is supportive in a way that makes the possibility of naming the hidden and dark parts of you seem much easier. Listening to her wisdom and experience kind of gave me this feeling that things could actually be simpler, that this wisdom could be basic, and that we often make things too complicated. Or maybe that's just me. Well, I'm a theory girl always getting tangled up, so I was also grateful that Caroline brought her professional and personal experience into conversation with Jaime to help contextualize the challenges that people face when trying to create new supportive relationships with poly or kink dynamics. I was genuinely moved by this conversation, not just because of Jaime's kindness and passion, but by how clearly she was able to show the power of connection and relationship in changing the world. Something, as I said, I'm always thinking about, but I can get pessimistic about too. I hope you find it inspiring too to hear her practical perspective that helps simplify ways to open up our lives and even be kind to ourselves and the ones we love. Jaime's accessible in many ways. You can find her at www.justsexpodcast.com, on Instagram at Jaime M. Grant, and on Facebook at Jem Grant. So it's Jaime, the way Jaime's spelled, but the French Jem, J''AIME. And you can email her at jaimemgrant@gmail.com. Her books are out, and she's available for coaching. If you want to access more of my work, as well as the work of the wonderful Carla Joy Bergman, Danny Burleson, and Vicky Ostweiler, you can sign up for our newsletter at cawshinythings.com. If you subscribe, you'll also get access to all of our articles, our Discord server, where we have discussion, movie nights, writing workshops, and book clubs, and much more. Our podcasts, advice column, and zine and sticker library are always free. I'm proud of the thing we're building together, creating a support system for the lonely and often impoverished work of writing, and also finding new ways to engage with people committed to collective thinking and writing. And if you're interested, I'll be leading a book club meeting on Emma Heaney's collection, Feminism Against Cisness, on November 19th at 5 p.m. Eastern through our Discord server. You're invited to subscribe and join. The Breakup Theory is a member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, which pulls together a wide variety of shows taking an anarchist perspective on culture, politics, action, and more. Check them out at channelzeronetwork.com. Hello, everyone. We're here today with Caroline to talk with Jaime Grant, who has Kink for Dummies coming out very soon and has also written Polyamory for Dummies, among other helpful texts from navigating love and sexuality. I'm really excited for this conversation. So first, Jaime, welcome. And do you want to give just a little bit of background on yourself, what you do, and what you're doing with these books?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It's just wonderful to be here. I identify as a sex activist, and I think I do because I came out in the 70s in an Irish Catholic enclave in Boston, and I was very curious about sex as a young person and also curious about sort of my Irishness in the middle of desegregation and, everybody talking about fairness and that we were good people in the middle of the Vietnam War. And so I think very early the contradictions in my communities and my families and, sexism, racism, colonialism, imperialism, just, in the living room every night at 6 on the news. And so I think that's really where my curiosity and the divide in my culture sort of started. So I've been in LGBT women's and racial justice movements pretty much all my life. And my work on poly and kink and other things really comes out of doing community-based workshops all over the world for the last 20 years. So I really feel great about it because I think a lot of the poly work especially has come from therapists who I love. I've been in therapy for many, many years myself, but it mostly reflects middle-class white folks who have access to therapy. And the worlds I've been moving in are really different from those worlds. And I wanted to bring that experience to light because it creates a very different paradigms of poly, if you will.
That's interesting. You're talking about the kind of middle class approach to kink and poly. And it seems like it's gotten so much more attention lately, the possibilities of, especially I think both kink and poly becoming more popular as options for people.
Yes.
But as that comes from a social media space, it does definitely seem represented by white influencers who live unattainable lives.
Yeah, very famous New York Times article of the polycule. I don't know if you saw it, 20 people. It was from Boston. They're all, working at Harvard, which is great. And I think poly is such a grassroots tech. It's such a tech on people who don't have capital, and are relying on social capital to create a safety net of love and care and community in their lives. And that's, I really wanted to bring that to life and to sort of displace the paradigm of one cis heterosexual guy with two women on either side of him who may or may not relate to each other sexually. And I hope I've done that in the book by bringing in 24 of my collaborators who are mostly BIPOC, queer, and trans. I was frankly shocked that the Dummies folks did not edit me or say, where are these other folks that we're used to hearing from? So the book really does present just such a mix of poly configurations and ways of being that I'm really familiar with and really wanted to bring into view.
I wanted to step in here and say, as you were talking, Jaime, I was thinking about this conception or the way that polyamory or non-monogamy is being commodified through those avenues as this enlightened decision or this lifestyle that comes through enlightenment, and how that kind of lives over here in what can be purchased rather than so many people who are in poly and queer worlds and communities. Like you said, there's a real ethic behind it too. And there's a laboring and a knowing what the laboring is for and toward. Right. So this, I don't know. I don't think it's quite like a binary split, but this idea of one person comes to non-monogamy through this idea that they've become enlightened versus this is what we do because we have to do it. No, I don't want to, that language makes it sound like there's no desire.
We're smashing patriarchy over here. We're looking at a way to reinvent the world. But I think that both sides are yearning for utopia. You know what I mean? They're
totally
yearning something else, but I do think it's more individualized over here, right? I mean, if you look at the poly things that are in, say, the couples therapy realms that you're seeing now on, the various shows, which I can barely watch, it is similar. It's just a very individual therapized language and the success of this unit and very much the dynamics that are going on, but not thinking more broadly about the world. And certainly not every queer is thinking more broadly about the world, but in the spaces I'm running in and doing the workshop and meeting people, their poly aspirations are very tied to their aspirations for rethinking everything around strength and deconstructing, systems that have been incredibly harmful to them.
Right.
I think it's interesting, Caroline, you bring up enlightenment, which I definitely think is that kind of bougie way of framing poly and kink also. But then there is some kind of moralist pressure within radical communities to say that poly is the only ethical way of having relationships. So I thought it was really helpful, Jamie, for you to talk about it as a tech, kind of a survival tech, because that's like, I've been, thinking a lot about family abolition, which is a big 70s movement idea that went away and is coming back. But, as Sophie Lewis talks about, it's like the deprivatization of care, how, in monogamous relationships, in nuclear families, we don't really have the care we need or the support we need. So it's it's so much framed as like freedom in a way, like autonomy, but like you're talking about more as like a kind of collectivity that gives us access to more support rather than just like sexual adventurism or something like that.
Yes. But, don't discount the sexual adventurism.
Totally right.
I really hate how this is also the sort of modern poly discourse. I mean, sounds like we're all having a root canal together. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, Jesus, I'm here because it's sexy. It's fucking sexy. It's liberating to be in new spaces over the course of my entire life with new people, experiment, find out new things about myself and keep going. That's freaking amazing. It's revolutionary, right? But yes.
Right. We don't want to run the risk of desexualizing or creating a view of polyamory or non-monogamy as only having these like kind of like lofty
or like all you do is have conversations and process sessions, you know what I mean? Which, I now in my 60s, I have almost zero process sessions. You know what I mean? It's like,
that sounds so nice.
The tech over time, you do get better at it, and you're in a community. We really don't have to endlessly deconstruct every interaction,
Mm-hmm.
And I try to say that in the book too, and in the Kink book as well around consent. It's like, you can have long, elaborate conversations about consent if that's what you really want and you need, and that's what takes care of you. And you can also, while you're ripping each other's clothes off, say, spit in my mouth, don't hit me, make me cry when I go. And that can be it. So, I'm trying to set the table for everybody in these books, right?
Yeah, there's like the stereotype within like kind of queer world is the cis gay guy who just like fucks whoever he wants whenever, like, and cruises, and there's anonymous sex, and then there's like endless lesbian processing about emotions. And I mean, it's so funny because like you're talking about the TV shows and like there's the queer ultimatum, and that's so monogamous oriented and so jealousy based.
Oh, it's so sad. It's so sad to see us just dragged into the heterosexual framework, if you will, in the monogamous framework. It's like, really, guys, this is not what I worked my ass off in the 80s and the 90s for, but do you, But yeah, it's interesting, I've done both of these books with my love, Jack Harrison Quintana, who I call my gay husband. He's not really my husband. He actually has a husband, but he has many, many hookups all the time, which he talks about in both books. And, when we started the poly book, he was the tech editor on it. And he was like, I don't really identify as poly. I'm just gay.
Mm-hmm. Right. I love that. Yeah.
Gay. I'm just a gay man being gay. But, I kind of roped him into a poly identification over time with all the different research and creations of various chapters. He was like, grudgingly, I guess you could say I'm a form of poly. But one of the things I like about that is that what I also hate in the current emerging bougie regimes around poly is just like, the litmus tests around language, get these, 50 terms exactly right. And I have a Gen Z daughter, and this is such a thing in her 17, 18-year-old community, which is like language is a litmus test, not a building block, and what I like to say in the book is like all these poly terms and ideas, they're Legos for you to construct the thing that you want to construct. They're not like, the day that she and her friends came in and told me I was actually not a lesbian because I eroticized men.
Oh my God.
All right, everybody sit in the living room. Have a long talk about this because people have been coming after me for this my whole life, and I am not going to have it from my own kids. Yeah, it's like everything isn't to put somebody in or push somebody out. You're communicating, you're trying to create a world together. And, what I think of as poly, Jack doesn't think of as poly. that's okay. What matters is that we can be in each other's lives and affirm and respect and take joy in each other's ways of being. And that's also what I hope the book really communicates.
Based on what you're just saying, I wonder what's the importance in naming something poly in your kind of conception?
I mean, really, is there any? I don't know. For me, the importance is to meet you and to learn what's important to you and to learn how to relate to you in a way that you can be maximally you and I can be maximally me. And I think a lot of language that we've created in the community is, to help us gather. So, does this language help us gather? Great. Does this language, stigmatize and push people out? Then, I'm not interested in it. I have no attachment to it. Jack's going to be in my life my whole life. I don't care how he thinks about it. I care that he gets to have sex with all these people that he loves and his partner loves that. And I get that he's romantic about me. And, we have this long collaborative thing that's so expressive and helps us both keep doing our best work. That's what I care about. I am worried that my daughter is just so, she's been really indoctrinated to care about that language in a way and these hierarchies of how you describe yourself and who you are. I mean, that's not what we all fought for. That's not what I laid my body on the street for.
I will say that I'm totally repulsed by the term nesting partner. I find it so disgusting. I hate it.
Kind of like a parasite, like nesting in a body.
Yeah. I don't know. It just makes the domestic scene. I mean, there's already a lot of ambivalence around domesticity, but it makes it sound so uninteresting and sexy. You've encountered this now. It's a new phenomenon on like apps like Field, right? Where it's like what looks like a straight couple who is now practicing ethical non-monogamy.
Yes.
They have their nesting partner. And it's like, these are the only people on the apps now, unless like you're like, the gay hookup apps, which are different. It's a different thing. But some people are using Field to kind of explore their kinks and their poly, and the way that these people present themselves, I find to be like kind of abhorrent. And then talking with them, I'm like, oh, you know what I mean? And it does end up seeming like a man getting to do what he wants, right? Like,
right. Yeah, I mean, we hope not, right? I mean, we hope all of this, putting these possibilities into the mix, all these very indoctrinal systems, right, is going to disrupt. We hope that, the people in the couple are going to do more than just, cherry pick some terms and do the same thing. I mean, that's my aim because I do have a political agenda. I do want to slow it all down.
The folks I work with who are really interested in asking themselves, what kind of world do I want to build, are going to bring that into any aspect of their life and exploration. And some of my favorite work is with cis-het, monogamous, long-term couples who it's like they wake up one day and they're like, this fucking sucks.
Yeah, this is
some of the work that I've been really, really privileged and like honored to see is when somebody says that thing that we've been doing sexually for 25 years like doesn't feel good to me, like I want to do this instead, or I want to try this instead.
Yep.
And it can be highly specific or it can be general. And I'm really committed to being alongside those conversations and to kind of ask the challenging questions. Like, what is it that is a turn on about your wife having sex with other women, but threatening about her fucking a man that she meets at a conference? Let's explore that, right? And not to create a setup where one thing is the right thing and gets the green light. But if we create systems that discourage any sort of exploration or any sort of possibility that we will end up with more questions than where we started, like we're not going to be moving toward liberation.
Yeah, and I think that the material conditions of the moment, which is that none of the cis-het white people who used to be able to buy a house, and sustain themselves reasonably in our cities because they've all been stolen by millionaires, now have to think through whether these structures that have always been a given are going to hold them. And I think that's what you see in that article in the New York Times that got so much play. Is so shocking to people, right? It's like a bunch of well-heeled people with degrees, and they're like, well, I'm not going to be able to buy a house. So I want to buy it with my, 6 polycule members. I want a different kind of security that's
Mhm.
not attainable in this current moment. So I do think, the current excitement about poly is driven by conditions that many, many more of us have been living under for a long time. And now it's like a whole new level of folks with resources now also cannot attain those things. And there's other motivations as well, right? I mean, I think lots of folks who may have had these ideas in different eras and just suppressed them, right? Or had these inclinations, have had a more expansive ability to connect and wanted to just did the thing. And
Mhm.
now the current conditions make it possible for people to be more visible about their actual wants.
Yeah, that's a good Marxist take that the material conditions are producing a culture of poly for different people. And it makes me curious also to think about how, more people are approaching the possibility of transition now, like the material conditions that allow for that. Because me being kind of bitchy about the ENM folks on field is like sort of, I'm not trying to be like gatekeepy about like these people do it wrong, because people do that so much within trans world about like non-binary people. Like
Right.
these are the people who aren't really poly or who aren't really trans, but there is something exciting about more people trying out things, even if our inclination is to dismiss it as not like radical, but we don't really know what is happening.
No, and the question is like, what happens to people once they get in that space? What other kinds of questionings? Who are they exposed to?
Right.
What kind
Yeah.
of life possibilities come into view? Once you start breaking out of the box, I mean, monogamy is a pretty big box to break out of, in
Mhm.
this regime. It's a pretty big thing to, you risk a lot around parental approval and all those things in a way that queers are used to doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I say this in the book, which is, heterosexual men and heterosexual women, I mean, having to deal with their families and what their families have invested in them and expected around carrying on traditions, money, everything. It's not a joke. It's like it's a serious intervention into that whole system. And people are going to lose families and lose inheritances and, well, just like we all did. So I really ask people like, do you have to come out? You know what I mean? It's like, think about it. Think about your material well-being. I mean, it's like, do your parents have to know how many lovers you have? I don't know. How important is it? And just weighing that thing of performing a different life and material security, I think is real.
I think about this with regard to kink as well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I mean, just the sheer amount of the real hatred of people's sexual behaviors or activities. I mean, it makes so much sense to me that there's like fear of being outed as kinky or polyamorous or a whore, or there's like a real, like strong hatred
Yes.
of sex, in addition to a hatred of sex. But even within, like, we were talking earlier about the risk of kind of desexualizing and kind of neutering and like making things more palatable, right? Like this idea that a foray into kink is only permissible as a way of like working through trauma. This comes up a lot in mental health, right? You actually have to have a reason to want to tie somebody up and hit them repeatedly and come on their face, right? Like a consenting, like excited party. You can't just want it. That's actually not proved. I was listening to a conversation with Avi Skakatopulo, who was talking about in trauma, we only really want people to make kind of like creative or beautiful things out of their trauma. But if people respond to trauma with their sexuality or their gender, then we really police that. So I think about that a lot with kink, the potential of like what somebody perceives to be true or not true about you if you are kinky.
Yeah. I mean, I think coming out kinky is a much bigger risk than the other things. I mean, people are getting fired and
Mhm.
stuff right in the moment and having their kids, the neighbor calls Child Protective Services, whatever. I mean, so I'm really, in the 2 books and Poly for Dummies, I mean, I really say, you have to look at the real vulnerabilities of your family in this system before you come out poly, and really same true for kink. I mean, I've been fired like 3 times. First for being queer, witch hunted for being poly. I never even came out kinky. And I've been out on the job since the 80s, so it's no joke to have to keep moving around people's perceptions. So people who can afford to come out are usually people who have endless material resources or none, on the spectrum, right? They have either nothing to lose because they're unemployable as it is, or they don't ever have to be employable. And people who have to be employable, they should really think about it. But more than coming out queer, when I came out as queer in the 80s, it was like telling people about your sex life, but it's not so much now.
Right.
Coming out poly, people might think it's weird or whatever, but you're not telling people about your sex life. When you come out kinky, you're telling people about what kind of sex you like.
Yeah.
That is, just like all stop, the world's on fire for people. So, I go over scene names and different ways people create layers of being out in their kink lives to protect themselves.
Thinking about how we invest sex with ideas of liberation, and I'm critical of that. I've thought a lot about the failures of gay liberation and sexual liberation, and just part of this is the fascistic turn of the feminist movement against kink and BDSM, and then trans exclusion and anti-porn and anti-sex work and all of these things. But there's this sense that we coming out is the idea that if you just are open about the thing, then you will be free. But the actual practices of sex don't actually free us in themselves. And Foucault's thing is we are actually given the idea that undoing the repression of sexuality is our freedom, whereas it's actually produced as this idea of freedom, if that makes sense. So I mean, I'm just curious, because obviously experientially there is some kind of opening that happens. You have that book, Mapping Your Desire, which is trying to get in touch with what you want, and thinking about also how desire changes. This is something that is really true with transition too, that you change and your desire changes. I don't know. I guess I'm just curious in your thoughts about what is liberating individually, and how that might be political, because you are talking about this as a kind of political approach.
I think sex is revolutionary, has revolutionary seeds. I have no qualms about saying that. My desire mapping work, I'm in a room of 250 people who are going over these questions about what they've denied about themselves or what they know. And then we get up and we tell each other those stories. I would rather be in that room than anywhere else in my fucking life around liberation. What's happened for me in those rooms, in Cyprus, in Russia, in South Korea, in Vietnam, in Dallas, in, Detroit, has been the most liberating place I've ever lived. It's like a future space. It's here we are talking about what fucking matters, about how we connect intimately and what feeds us, what helps us grow, what we've dropped, about what we hate about ourselves, what we've let ourselves expose to another human being. I mean, that's fucking revolution, baby, especially in this regime, especially among these people. I mean, in Cyprus, a woman who had female genital mutilation figured out how to get herself off anyway, and shares a whole story of a life of having orgasms beyond that. I mean, I would rather be in that room than anywhere else in my life. So, yeah, I mean, the theorists, blah, blah, blah. Get out there and look at people and what we can do intimately with each other, no matter what's going on in the regimes above us. I mean, that is an incredibly revolutionary space. It's changed my entire life. It's changed my entire trajectory of what I thought was possible. It's kept me alive. I mean, I come from a land of alcoholism in Ireland. Everybody's dead in their 40s or 50s of alcoholism. The women in my lives have done nothing but serve everybody around them and lived with major depression. And I have not. Mm-hmm. And my commitment to my own sexual expression and insistence on it has been an absolutely revolutionary force for my other activism. Right? For getting in the streets, for continuing to think there's a reason to fight all this shit, that there's a place we're going together. And I think that I've had so much incredible sex and so many beautiful lovers who've exposed their vulnerability to me. That's what gives me hope, right? Those moments of revealing ourselves to each other and trusting each other with our vulnerabilities and like the ugliest parts of ourselves. It's like, yeah, let's go make a fucking better world. It's possible.
The way you put it, because like I was saying, I'm critical of it because there was like a simplified version of it, but it's also, and it's very seductive to think that like, I mean, I'm using that word consciously, like that sex is freeing, but it isn't simply the act of sex, though that obviously changes you, but like the possibilities of connection, like you're saying, like the people who are talking about this in the late 60s and 70s were like, we live like collectively, right? Like pursuing our desires in this way sexually also changes, your individualism and your ability to collaborate. And so it's like, yeah, there is that kind of material distinction beyond the act of sex, but
Yes.
that comes from approaching sex and relationships differently.
Yes. I remember I did this workshop just thinking about this. It was called You Say Fetish and I Say Affinity. And it was talking about how, four of us talked about either being fetishized by people, against our will, or having certain affinities that we pursued, across race, gender, class, whatever, that was, more consensual and liberating for us. And at the end of it, a couple of very well-known leather activists came up to us and told us we'd just done a fucking disservice because we politicized the idea of fetishes, and like they did not want to have to deal with this shit in their spaces, which was really thinking about my favorite term, whether they were sexual shoplifters, which is, they come in and they get off on a certain dynamic and then they go out of the room and they have no commitment to undoing the aspects, the setup of that dynamic. They're in a boardroom of all white men and they don't think about it. They're in a policy group that, shits on whatever group they're so excited about. Mm-hmm. So the idea that the incredible gift of that exchange also comes with obligations or comes with, responsibilities in the world is something I believe deeply. And I don't think you can ever write it in a way, right? I mean, it's like I played in all kinds of ways and different people, in terms of their material conditions and place in the order. I don't think I can fight enough really to justify the joy I've gotten. But, that's the imperfect world I'm in, and I'm just going to keep going. One of the things that I think is like really exciting about rethinking our relationships in this way is like multiplying the possibility of relationship. Because, this is sort of the approach that we take in through the idea of the breakup theory is like, it's not breaking up as this kind of simple negative act of rejection or like closing off or whatever, but that thinking about things from this certain angle allows you to reevaluate or reemphasize relationship and be more aware of how you engage in it. And, one of my questions as I was reading is like the relationship between lovers and friends in one way. And then we kind of skirted on parenting and family. And I think the kind of utopian ideas. One thing I always go to is this description in Samuel Delaney's Trouble on Triton, which is not just a pure utopia, but he says like there's this thing in it where it's like we've figured out that the best way to raise a child is to have like 7 or 8 adults of all genders who like care about you. Like that multiplication of care, I think it is sort of connected also to an opening, I think, of desire. So okay, so I'm asking you a question about like friendship and partnership and like poly and parenting, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I love in the book, there's a bunch of people who talk about their friendships as important or, they invest in them at the level that they invest in their lovers or sexual partners. And that's certainly true of me. I raised my kids in a village and I believe in the 7-to-1, all absolutely. And the times that I have really failed my kids is when I've more nuclearized my family and let go of people and things got very wonky and not good for them.
Yeah.
So, and I'm in an amends process with them around that. And I mean, I have a friendship circle that's a love and romance circle. One person in the circle now I'm sexual with now, but I used to be sexual with about 3 of them. And like 4 of them are my super romantic partners and best friends. A couple, most of them have helped me raise my kids. And every year I have a birthday Zoom with this group. And I got to say, it's the most important tradition in my life. And I used to hate my birthdays because when I was sort of monogamous or whatever, and in like a primary partnership, my birthday was always a silent test.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, how much are you going to celebrate me? I'm just going to wait over here and then I'm going to ultimately be disappointed. And now I organize this birthday Zoom with my 7. And, we each do highlights of the year together. We bring our favorite music. It's only like an hour and 15 minutes. And I do a little PowerPoint every year of my favorite moment with them. And it's just so fucking meaningful.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't wait. Everybody thinks about the Zoom all year. Everybody gathers little things for it. Sometimes, send things. One year I sent everybody a necklace, like was so possessive. This is your mom. Everybody has to wear it on the Zoom, So yeah, I mean, I think friendship is, it's the most revolutionary and least attended thing in our love lives, in our survival. I also do a lot of research, and I did the first national trans study, and I now just did an LGBTQ women's study, and the level of trauma, intimate partner violence and disability, 50% or more people on all counts. And the number one way people in the study survive is their friendships. Institutions are barely supporting them. Does any queer organization care about friendships in the way that it should? Absolutely not.
I didn't realize how mystified I was. I was like, it's just my parents with the birthday thing. I never thought about it as like a monogamy thing, which makes so much sense. But yeah, the experience of trauma and abuse is often so isolating. And like that, I think what you're saying about like orgs and not emphasizing friendship is really true. But it also seems to be, in my experience of supporting survivors or victims or being part of like a situation of abuse, like people really don't show up a lot of the time. And it's hard. I don't know. I just think it's so important to build a culture of support, like, because that stigma of being a victim is like, yeah, I don't know. People really just, it's like when you're sick too, right? People like walk away from, they're like, I don't want to be part of this. And maybe that's like the other side of like the kind of excitement of like something like poly, is like the way that the kind of violence that comes from domestic situations that are typically more kind of nuclear family based or monogamous based, like, yeah, how that really just isolates you so much. And we just don't have networks or a culture, even within radical spaces, even within queer spaces, that like can fully support someone who's in danger or recovering from something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the transformative justice, the women of color and queer movements who are writing about this and making real interventions in this have really informed my work. And one of the things I'll say about when I do desire mapping, I always have the core storytellers. We come out as survivors of sexual abuse so that it centers survivors as the storytellers and the authorities in the room, rather than kind of like an aside or something we have to accommodate or make it hard for someone to come out with their experience. It's like, no, in any given time, if there's 5 storytellers, 4 of us, or 4 or 5 of us are survivors. It's just part of what we bring. I mean, I always say, they always say 1 in 3 women. I've never met those other 2 women. Everybody in my life has been affected by sexual violence. And so I definitely live in a community of survivors who are talking about it all the time. And talking about it in our sex and talking about how it comes up. And, it's like, what's the new thing on your map? And how does that relate to, what new level did you get to around your own healing work? And it's, it's again, just like a revolutionary gift. I mean, it's something I take for granted now, but it's like, we had to fucking carve those conversations out. We built the ground for those conversations to be had. And I think in the poly world, the great thing that I think you're saying is like, it's harder to be isolated in an IPV situation when you've got all these partners and everybody's observing, right? It isn't. I mean, one of the things about in the LGBTQ women's survey, the number one way LGBT women, their top 2 tools are gaslighting and friendship disruption. Okay. And this is another thing I feel like we just have to like get out in the world and talk about, which is I have so many friends who are in a kind of captivity in their relationships around friendship disruption and being gaslighted. And gaslighting is an overused term, but it's like undermining your sense of reality and undermining your faith in yourself, and by constantly lying and pushing your agenda. And, poly groups can disrupt that or they can accommodate it. And also there's just the danger in any poly situation, which I do talk about in the book, of like, are you really saying what your limits are? Or are you saying what you think your partner wants? Are you saying something that's going to ensure that you get to stay here in this very cool group of people you want to be in? And that kind of cultish stuff can happen anywhere. It can happen among the most radical queers. It can happen amongst the most vanilla heterosexual, whatever, So I think it's so ubiquitous that it's hard to see. And then it's also hard to disrupt. It's like, how do you take care of survivors when you see it? I think that's another conversation we're just getting on top of.
I want to talk about consent and I think that's like what you're kind of getting to that in terms of talking about what people's like limitations are. And I'm not trying to make an abrupt transition, but this is obviously such an important part of kink. And poly world is like the idea of consent, maybe negotiating consent. And it's something that I have thoughts on. So I just wanted to maybe first have you kind of discuss the way that consent works as a tool within your approach, how you figure it in poly and kink stuff.
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is that like consent is relational, not transactional. It happens in a context among the people you're creating it with. It's unique in every situation and it's fluid. It's conversational. It's changing all the time. It's dynamic and interesting.
And it's intrapersonal too.
Right.
Which can be harder to articulate and bring into dialogue.
Right. So I really this will be interesting for you. I kind of object to the after consent, beyond consent people. And I know you love them. So let's talk about that. And I don't object to what they're saying. I object to the idea that there's an after or a beyond, especially in the world we live in. I am part of the group of people that in the 70s fought like hell to get consent to even be an idea that somebody had to wrestle with. It was legal to rape your wife. It was legal to stalk. It was, the idea that your boyfriend could rape you was a joke. So consent for me, what I get about the critique in these is that as soon as you create a practice, it gets co-opted by the regime, right? It becomes a legalistic, I'm not interested in the legalities at all. The legal system's done nothing for me or any of the survivors in my life. I'm interested in what we're doing with each other. And consent matters to me in what we're doing with each other. It matters to me that the person I'm with wants the thing that I want or wants the thing that they want. And that I know it, that we have a way to articulate what that is. So the way that I worked it in the Kink for Dummies book, which is coming out in November, is, your rubric for consent can be pretty easy. Stoplight system, red, yellow, green. But your container for a scene and the guardrails that you can create can be much more dynamic. And people use the yes, no, maybe lists and to whatever way. Some people don't need them. Some people just need to have a conversation. Some people need to take their queer theory books, which, I have a whole other thing on queer theory, to the table and have, talk about all their theorists in whatever way and learn about each other and learn what matters. And then you're ready for the scene. Like bring what matters.
Yeah.
And figure out how to create the scenes. I don't use the word negotiation. I hate it. I put that in.
Can you say more?
Yes, it's such a business term. In business negotiation, one person wins and one person loses. One person ups and the other one has to give up something they don't want. I don't like it. It's a transactional term. I co-create everything. I have conversations. I don't like negotiation. I don't negotiate in my sexual life at all. I get what I want. I don't do what I don't want ever. If I find myself in a space where I'm doing what I don't want, I can think about it and then advocate for myself, right?
I think that's an important thing, that what do you do with an experience that you were open to, but then felt bad?
Yeah, I talk about that all the time. One of the things I say in Kink for Dummies is mistakes will be made.
Yes, of course.
And we have to make room for the fact that among really well-intentioned people who've really talked this through, sometimes the scene's going to go bad.
Yeah.
Get hurt. Someone else is going to get hurt. And one of the things I did in the book was go through the history of consent rubrics in kink communities, which is pretty interesting. And, safe, sane, consensual came out of like a gay male group in the 70s or the 80s and was just used for such a long time because it was pushing back on the idea that kink spaces were inherently abusive. And so, everybody loved this. It was like such a great thing. But then rack and prick came after it, which were about like personal responsibility. And because so many various things had gone wrong and do go wrong all the time, and it was the idea that anyone entering the space has to take responsibility for themselves and their own well-being, and that things may or may not go wrong. But even a little later, CCCC came up, and this is just in sort of an obscure academic article. And CCCC, I can't remember now the four things. I was going to look it up before, but it's about communal care, right? Which is, yes, everyone has personal responsibility in the scene and undertakes their own risks, but we also are living in a kink community that values community and values care. And things are going to go wrong. I like CCCC because it also notes that you can see that things are going wrong sometimes, right? And you can check in with someone, right? You can talk within your community if you think someone's not doing well. And again, rather than policing, right? It's care. It's like, how am I in a collective care situation in the community that I'm in around kink? So I'm interested in that perspective, and I'm interested in co-creation. But I don't think we're ever going to be after consent or beyond consent, given the structures of the society that we live in.
I'm not saying consent's bad or stupid. Like, I think it is an important tool when you're engaging in sex, intimacy, relationships. But I guess, I think we have to be kind of honest about how it works, which is sort of what you're saying. For me, I'm always thinking about it's like an infinite regression. Like if you're actually trying to consent to everything at every moment, it's impossible.
Those don't have to be your choice. I mean, I'm a free use person. You know what I mean? My thing is, once we agree that you're my person and I trust you, you don't even have to ask me. You can have sex with me anytime, anywhere, whatever you want to do. But I've consented to that. I hate checking in every minute. Don't talk to me. Do the thing. But that's going to come out in our consent conversation. But there has been a consent conversation happening, right? That has happened. But I also think the Gen Zers are doing sexy things with affirmative consent that's also not getting clocked. Okay. So I do want to, I think this is a Gen Z intervention that comes out of a lot of fan fiction. It comes out of a lot of grassroots conversation that they're having where it's like, green, yes. Green, yes. Green, yes. You can play in anything. And so I also don't want to be dissing that this generation that's growing up in arguably 100 times more violent a situation than I grew up in is playing with affirmative consent in their self-created porny spaces, and I assume their relationships as well. So I'm interested in seeing, I in the book I say, the green light is a place of innovation. This generation is interested in the green light, and I'm interested because they're interested.
Can you say more about the green light to contextualize it for people?
So, red means stop instantly. Yellow means, like slow down. I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm a big fan of the yellow light. And I think it's really kind of the most oft used in the stoplight system, right? And green is like, are you green? Are you good? Yes, go. Green means go. So again, when I look at what my daughter in particular has survived growing up in DC, getting through COVID, increasingly militarized presence, she's constantly accosted on the street by whoever who's interested in her. She's navigating the public school system. I don't know because her stuff is private, right, around her own sexuality. But I am noting in observing her generation's group of grassroots created porny stuff, they really are talking about the green light all the time. So I'm interested in the green light. And I was around when it sort of got created at Antioch, okay, back in the day. So I've been in the picture for a long time. And this does feel different. I mean, it feels like they want to play with the idea of affirmation. So if that works for you, great. It doesn't work for me. I do not want to talk about like, now you can put your hand over here and now you can put it over here. I mean, I'd rather read a book,
Yeah. A couple things are on my mind. I started working with couples about 5 years ago, and I found myself feeling really kind of like disheartened and stuck and sad because I was finding over and over again, particularly with younger couples, there was a lot of tension in what they were bringing to therapy around one person in the relationship feeling a strong pressure that the like onus of the enthusiastic consent was on them, right? Like this idea that I have to know my yes, like, and I have to know it with immediacy, and I have to know it even within the realm of this new partnership. And I think that that's where my interest in having some critical lens around consent as the word that you're using, Jamie, that you don't like to use, negotiation, right? As like like a negotiation tactic. Like you get this, which means the other person doesn't get this. And I was just finding that in those conversations, there was so much internal strife and pressure and feeling poorly about oneself if one did not have an immediate or clear or enthusiastic yes about what they desired, right? And I think that's like the whole point of you having this book, Mapping Your Desire, right?
Yeah, that is the whole point.
That's the whole point, right? But I was seeing that so frequently, and I still see that even in individual work where there is this tremendous amount of shame that becomes internalized. And I see it particularly with LGBTQ women and queer people. And I really have a hard time with this idea that the totality of one's sexual desire like has to be crystal clear and known immediately out the gate when we live under violently oppressive institutions. And I think that that's my critique of kind of the pop psychologyification of consent. And then again, having structure for exploration is fucking important.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
like, and it's just like, it is actually really fucking important that people be able to say, I learned about this system. It's the green light system. I want to try it.
Mhm.
You know, like if I had a partner who said that to me, I don't think I would be like, 1 minute, like, let me tell you how I feel about, you know, this, that, and the other. So I want to share a personal anecdote, if that's okay. I was at a play party and I pulled aside a friend that I had played with before and who I was seeing in a continued scene throughout the night with this other person. And I was just letting this person know, hey, I'm noticing some things about this scene and the way that this person is responding. And I just want to offer that I'm noticing this and just kind of a check-in, which is the person that I was checking in with, who again has been my play partner, who I trust to be very thoughtful. I was having my own kind of reaction come up, right? Like, am I seeing somebody moving out of the ability to be kind of like actively present in this scene? Or am I projecting my own shit? Right. So it felt like such a risk to go to this friend and say, hey, I know that you all have had the yes, no, maybe conversation, and I'm still seeing some stuff
Mhm.
that's like, I'm feeling a little alarmed.
Right.
And I share that anecdote not because I think I did it perfectly, because like I said, I certainly had my own stuff coming up around it, but I'm pulled back to this reminder that if we're relating interpersonally and there's sex added on top of that, like things can feel messy and disorganized. And all we can do for one another is be committed to working through it and moving toward it.
Yeah, showing up.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, I'm activated by this scene. And am I activated because of my stuff, or am I seeing something that shouldn't be happening in my community? Right. Like,
Right.
and where are the guardrails in this space? You know, so there's supposed to be a dungeon master, or you know what I mean? It's like I'm not alone in my situation. It's like you said, it's like, what's the container for this space to help us? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a friend, which again, so important, right? I mean, you had a friend to take care of you in the space and that you could also check in with.
Yeah.
The thing about desire mapping is, you know, I mean, I started it. I mean, when I think about myself and my childhood, I was just a liar from the get-go. I just lied my ass off. Nobody really knew me. I was always afraid 3 of my friends would be in the room in the same time and the jig would be up, like, because they all knew a different Jamie, right? And I think this is just a huge survival tool around surviving patriarchy, white supremacy, a police state of various kinds, right? And I had my own particular one. And so we form our sexuality inside of this. And we all are just such liars. When people started to come to me and tell me their sex desires, and which is why I created the workshop, I think getting disowned by my parents, I just like put a sign on me, come tell me about your sex stuff. Everybody's lying to their partner. Everybody's lying in the moment. They're performing something they think everybody wants, but they want something else. And so I created the workshop to create a space where people would start telling the truth about what they wanted, and also sharing stories about like what happened when they finally got through lying to themselves and asked for the thing that they wanted, and what happened in the space then, right? So that's my storytellers are all people who've mapped with me and all have something to share about coming to a different space than masking. And yeah, I think what looks like a problem around consent among your partners is really that maybe neither person is centered in exactly what they want. They don't even know what they want. God, when I did the workshop in Russia to 200 people, a couple of people got up and said, nobody's ever asked me what I wanted. Like, this workshop brings up tremendous grief. I can barely believe I'm getting through this workshop, because the idea that something that I want should be centered in any kind of interaction, just not happening here. And I had all Russian storytellers telling their stories to their peers, because that's also the tool, which is like, it's not my community's stories, it's your community's stories. And it just brought up so much intense grief for people. But that's certainly not the only place. It happens in the US and all sorts of rooms that I'm in, where it's like, what I want? The world's constructed against me even thinking about what I really want. And if I do know, it's so unacceptable related to my identity, right? Which really goes back to my daughter telling me, I'm not a lesbian, right? It's like the primacy of identity, the regime of identity. And if I identify as X, then I can only want these certain things. And one of the things I say in mapping is like, here I'm a lesbian, I'm running a rape crisis center, and I really want to have sex with men. All my fantasies are military gangbang scenes. I'm just like, I'm the worst person on earth. I should turn in every card I have, my lesbian card, my pacifist card, my whatever card. And breaking out of that and realizing, as long as I do have consent, and as long as I am being myself in a place of integrity, I can fantasize and do whatever the fuck I want. And that's, the idea behind mapping, but it's not what most people bring into your couples rooms. Am I right? It's not what most people bring into the room. For me, like, I do tons of coaching. It's not what people think is okay for them when we start the conversation.
Yeah. And I think what you're speaking to is that there are so many, and this is not to kind of like overemphasize language, right? But like the difference between having conversations around consent and having conversations around desire mapping, they intersect. But there are ways in which some conversations deserve a little more time and primacy. A lot of the work I do with couples around non-monogamy happens when people come in and they want to kind of retrofit polyamory or non-monogamy onto like a pretty significant betrayal.
Right.
And that's fine. Like, I'm just like, absolutely. Like, if you all want to not be in monogamy anymore, like, I am going to support your exploration. We will get there, but we actually can't retrofit it without
dealing with trust breaches.
Yeah, without talking about like, where did your desire map get wonky? Where did your trust map or your self-trust map get wonky? Like, that has to be given some significant weight before we can kind of get to the like more fun, do you want to all wake up in the same bed together and have breakfast conversation.
The identity thing is, I think, a big deal, right? Because like, we are given this idea that we have to discover who we are, right? And sexuality and gender are a major part of discovering who we are. But then our sense is that that identity is like static and also definitional in these ways of like you were saying, like what behaviors are open to you. And it's so hard to have that kind of self-transparency and to know it. And then like for me, like one of the things that is really interesting, and that like I've talked about this before, but like transitioning helps with is like looking back and being like, oh, I did all these things. They felt weird. I don't know why, but now I have an idea of why they didn't feel good. Maybe this is where Gen Z people are having a little bit more possibilities and openness, because even though I think like social media has created a situation where like defining yourself is like super important, I also think that Gen Z people are wiggling around a lot within that world, or at least, some people, which maybe gives them more possibility to like explore and know themselves. But like I have like some kind of allergy to like workshop things and like questions like that. And so I don't know how I can articulate things. And like sometimes just reading about like, this is the thing you can do, I'm like, whatever, I don't know. That doesn't turn me on. But then situationally, things can come up and be exciting that you wouldn't have predicted in in reading about. So I guess I'm just like, I am curious in like how you might usher someone like who can't articulate these things, no matter how like I don't know if it's a repression or like internalized phobias or whatever, without possibly like having to do the kind of therapy work of like, why are you like, why are you like this? What?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the mapping tool for me, it's like some people really love the workshop because they can just sit in the workshop and not say a word, and all this stuff happens around them and people discover things about themselves, and it's so spontaneous. You know what I mean? It's like people look at reflection questions, and I really don't ask a lot of whys. What I ask is like, what was your favorite sex ever? Like, what was happening? What lover do you miss the most? Why do you miss them? What sexual experience did you have that you really felt like yourself the most in? And those questions, people just jump up and they remember things that they've buried because they weren't appropriate for their identity, for the setting, for whatever. So many of these things don't happen in necessarily significant relationships. They happen in passing. They happen with someone they weren't supposed to be with. That's the other thing. So many people who have a bad agenda for us still create experiences where we get these enormous insights and then we're supposed to bury them. So many survivors are helped in that space to be like, oh my God, my abuser did this. And I always wanted to have this part of me and I had to give it away, right? Or give up on it. So I think for some people, that space of the workshop is the revolutionary space because they don't have to say anything and they're in it. Or they do say something comes up and they do it. And for other people that I've worked with, and I've worked with people who like come to me like, I have no sexual expression, I have nothing, I have no experience. And like the simplicity of the questions about just getting back to what you remember. Like my first desire mapping point in my book is like when I was 6, the boy next door who I just loved and hated drove me crazy. I fought with him all the time. And one time I like beat him up and he's like under my swing in my front yard and I just kiss him and then he just melts. And it was like, I'm 6 years old. My body's on fire. I don't really understand what's happening to me. It's like the power of a kiss. It's like the hurting before the kiss. All of that's in my sexuality now, right? And mapping helped me go back and find it and like have some respect for the moment and understand it as a formative thing for me. It's like, oh my God, everything with the mouth for me forever. And here it is. It's back here with Bobby Durand on Fort Cowan Road, So I think that the way that I work with the book coaching, some people buy the book and the book works for them. So, having someone, maybe you buy the book and you have a friend you can talk to about it. And I'm not just promoting my book. It's like a process. It's like, you don't even have to buy the book. Think about the things that matter to you. Think about pivotal moments you've had. Think about someone talked to you a certain way at a bus stop and you never saw them again, but it was like the way they related to you. Just try to remember yourself and try to remember the things that mattered and moved you, and then start there.
That's so helpful. That's so helpful because it's concrete and not like aspirational, which I think, that kind of future orientation is really hard sometimes to fill in. I mean, sometimes you have like, I really want to try this thing, but like,
right.
But grounding it in experience, that makes sense. I mean, I read it in the book too, but sometimes it's hard for me to like put myself into that emotional vulnerability that like being in a workshop can open up when you're like reading something, But that's also something I really appreciate with your books is that your approach to this stuff isn't like a typical kind of self-help book with the bougie trappings. Like you set it in the kind of context that I understand, like politically and socially and culturally, and don't kind of present it as like the cure, the enlightenment, the access to freedom, but more just like these kinds of possibilities that like are immediate for your life.
Yeah, and the loving challenge of specificity.
And I have to say, I've had people stand up in a room next to a partner of 20 years and say stuff that neither of them knows,
Right.
I've had people leave the person they came in with.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the workshop. I've had someone come up and say, I've been gay my whole life and I've been hiding that I'm straight. I mean, honestly, and it's like, what world would have, encouraged you to be gay instead of straight? I don't know. But hey, go get that life. Go get the life that's really yours, Yeah, I mean,
Go get married and have kids.
and I think that it's just given me so much life to be in this conversation for 20 years. Every time I get in the room, I'm excited. I can't wait to see what happens. And what also happens is like the stories themselves create such a different experience. I remember one year at Creating Change, someone got up early and said, I have this sort of atypical body for fucking, and so it makes it difficult for me because of X. And then 6 other people got up and talked about their atypical bodies, right? And one year a survivor had a certain experience, and then the room is just filled with, like, all of a sudden it's a community of people who had this experience. And it's just incredible. It's life-changing every time.
Yeah, there's a lot I kind of want to think about there. And maybe, okay, I'm going back to consent and trying to maybe politicize a little bit. Like, because I think interpersonally and like consent totally makes sense to me. But I think maybe one of the reactions that people have to it is that like we still like, what do we do that we're in a rape culture, that like mostly cis men harm people, and that it's like ignored and supported, and like consent obviously doesn't feel like the tool that's going to overcome that, because it hasn't over decades. It's empowering in your personal life, but it doesn't protect you. I mean, just like all the state institutions don't protect you. And so like, not trying to like push that, but like, I like saw that you did the workshop too about what is the point of all this in a world that's burning, right? What does this like kind of radical approach to sex and do for us within that moment? And so maybe that's like an intervention you can make here, just because like rather than thinking that these tools can protect us from the violence that we're experiencing every day, like there's some other reason to approach these things that you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, I think of consent as the floor, right? And really, it's our connection to each other and what we build together in that conversation that is the thing that's going to protect us. That's the thing that's protected me. It's these relationships I've created because I've been able to be myself, and I've been able to, like my most abject self, the things I think that are the dirtiest, worst, most unlovable things, I've been able to show someone else and then have them take it in, enjoy it, and love me afterwards. That has created a kind of courage and resilience that's just given me my whole life. So, I mean, everybody doesn't have to do that in their sexual life, but I think every time we expose ourselves, even if it's to someone in an alley and you're jacking them off and you don't know their name, it's like, I'm interested in the humanity of that person. I want them to leave better than I found them, just for the day, right? I'm not here to get something from them and take something from them. That is a revolutionary intervention into this culture. And I'm in it. I'm so up for it, and so up for helping anybody along the way who's up for it. Because I think it raises our vision for what's possible bigger than just what happens in the sexual interaction.
That's beautiful. Yeah, the way that you're putting these things is really helpful. We've covered a lot, but is there stuff that we need to talk about before we end the conversation?
Well, I want to say thank you, Jaime. I'm sitting here really taking a lot in and not saying much, but these are conversations that I could have all the time, and I'm so grateful to have heard you today, because I feel really invigorated by what you're sharing. I have a lot of, sometimes being a social worker and working one-on-one with people and trying to apply my training to like the hope that this is rippling out into creating more radical possibilities just feels really far away from me. I often have to view my work as this is a job and there's a skill set and you know, this is just what I am doing, right? And I'm invested in the relationships and I love and challenge my patients and that feels important to me. But I think hearing you talk today about your experiences and how they keep you feeling like energized and lubricated and excited has been really inspiring for me because I want to feel that way more than I do, which I don't think for me necessarily means, you know, a big career change, but just really recognizing that there's more potential than I perhaps give myself credit for. And I think I do a really good job at kind of talking in a self-deprecating way about my work. But I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation. It has been really beautiful to have these conversations with people who have decided that the thing that is like violently oppressive is no longer what they want to be doing in their sex life or in their romance life or in their family life. I'm grateful to hear you share today.
Thanks. It's been great meeting you.
The thing that I'm taking away that I maybe didn't expect, although again, this could just me being dumb, but that like, you know, community, there's a desire for community, and that's another mystified term, and it's something that doesn't feel accessible to a lot of people for all of the reasons structurally and personally and job-wise and all that, and, you know, materially. But like what I'm really hearing you talk about is, first of all, like on an individual level, that these open up spaces for relationality that you wouldn't necessarily have, which can, yeah, like Caroline's saying, ripple out to forming larger communities. And that really, like, all of these instances that you've been describing are like enactment of community that didn't exist before, that gives you a different orientation of and a different sense of what's possible. And maybe it only lasts for the workshop, but that, I mean, I think that's really important because searching for that connection and not finding it so often is like really discouraging in this world.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Yeah, any last things that you want to put out there?
No, I think we should hope, you know, and I think every interaction we have with each other matters so much. And we can bring our good intention, we can bring the tools that we have, you know, and believe that, you know, our love, our intimacy, and our connection, we can remake the world with it together.
Yeah, it's like everyday acts, not reproducing this shit world. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the books, and we'll link to all the information for the episodes so people can buy your books, find you on the internet and the work that you're doing, and access that however you're putting out there. So
much, yeah. And I hope we stay in each other's lives. This has been so great.
You've been listening to The Breakup Theory. As always, if you like the show, please rate and follow us wherever you get it, and tell your friends they need to break up. Bye.